So it's probably about a month ago or so that we heard some reports and some news notes come out about some new polls that were being done and some new documentaries that were being done, and how some of the youth were looking at the ways that dams were impacting salmon runs and orca and whale habitat and the livelihoods of those animals that are out there. And so we were reporting on those notes that came through to the old news desk at iFiber One, and after that we got a message in from the PUDs here in Mason County 1 and 3, wanting a little bit of time to just kind of explain their side of that same issue, and how the dams in eastern Washington are very impactful to the use of renewable energy and public power here in Mason County and throughout the whole state. So we were able to finally get together both from PUD 3, Joel Myer, and from PUD 1, Commissioner Jack Janda, to talk a little bit about this. So good morning. Good morning, guys. How you doing?
Good morning. Doing great today.
Good to see you in here. And
thanks for having us.
Did I set that up pretty well? I mean, you guys, you saw those same reports, and
it's an incredibly complex issue. That's the easiest thing to say about not just Snake River dams, and there are 4 of them on the lower Snake River, but the impacts of our activities as humans on the entire West Coast and the Salish Sea, and their impacts on salmon runs, the southern resident orcas, because most of the other pods of orcas in the Pacific Northwest are doing relatively well, but this one pod, who seems to have a penchant for wanting Chinook salmon most of the time, is having its issues. And it's about food. Yeah. And let's be frank about that. It's about food not just from the Columbia River, where each of us who pay electricity bills in Mason County and at other public utility districts throughout Washington State, each of us pay about 14% of our bill towards fish and wildlife programs to help modify dams, do habitat restoration, manage fish stocks and hatcheries. So when you see a study come out and they're saying people would be willing to pay $14, $15, $20 for salmon recovery in the Pacific Northwest, public power customers are already doing that for the Columbia River. So fish issues are very complex, especially when you take a look at what's happening with, say, for example, the Fraser River in Canada. That's where a lot of the fish for Puget Sound come for the salmon. So let's talk about the Salish Sea. Most folks are focusing on Puget Sound, but the Salish Sea includes Canada and the Georgia Strait. And 2 things are going on the Fraser River. First of all, they had a big slide there that's blocked off the river for returning salmon. Bad problem. And it's an undammed river. Well, it used to be before that slide. The second thing is that their stocks have just plummeted there. 7 years ago, they saw millions of fish returning. Now they're expecting possibly about 600,000 returning. And they don't know why. They're thinking it's ocean conditions. In the Columbia River Basin, the fish returns have ranged between 1.5 and 2.5 million regularly. In the 1920s and 1930s, salmon was almost extinct because of canneries and the lack of habitat restoration. So about that time, about 500,000 salmon were returning every year. Now we're at that 1.5 to 2.5 million thing, and a lot of it's due to the fact that customers are spending money to make sure that can occur.
Jack, how much on the PUD 1 side of issues here in Mason County does the power come from? Let's focus on those 4 dams at the Snake River. How much power do you guys get from that? And what would be the impacts? Is it that 14% that people are willing to pay, or what would be the outcome for the ratepayers at the end of the day if something were to happen to those dams?
So right now, about I think it's 11% of the power is generated from all the dams. 11% comes out the 4 lower Snake River dams. So if if you were to put that into, Joel and I were just talking about this a few minutes ago, is if you were to look at the bill that iFiber One pays, you'd probably be what, Joel? We've talked about 5%.
It would have to go up because you'd have to find other resources.
Sure.
But I guess what I'd really like to mention is I'm concerned about the the complexity of this whole thing. It's a people problem. We have ocean conditions. We have overharvest by commercial fisheries. We have the tribal issues with fish. We have contaminated waterways. We have noise pollution. And so I scratch my head how we can be looking at the 4 Snake River dams. Those fish running up the Columbia system are coming down out of Canada, and they're not coming into Puget Sound. They're bypassing and going down to the Columbia River system. So I scratch my head as to how these Snake River dams really contribute to that, because the resident killer whales in Puget Sound mostly reside in Puget Sound, and they feed in Puget Sound, and most of the fish they eat come out of the Fraser River. So I think it's a bigger problem than people realize, and there's many solutions to the problem.
I've seen at Lake Cushman and the Kokanee Dam there, they have implemented some, like the fish elevator there. Or you've seen on the news over the last couple of weeks, the people are sharing the videos of the fish cannons that they move from the lower areas, the tube as it gets them through. Does that take care of most of the salmon that need to get past those dams in the area?
That's an incredibly good point, because 2 things come to mind. There's extra water being spilled through the dams right now that reduces generation of electricity from dams on the Columbia River, and the main reason for that is to help small fish get over the dams and through. And there's a 96% survivability rate at each dam for those small fish that are coming down. And all of the dams that go up through the Snake River Basin, except for privately held dams, have fish passage on them, fish ladders and things like that. So if you take out those 4 Snake River dams, each of which has fish passage built into it, just upstream from those dams is a privately held dam from Idaho Power, the Hells Canyon Complex, that has no fish passage at all. So basically you're opening up a stretch of river that fish can move up, and they will run into a concrete wall with no place to go. So people need to realize that it's not a magic bullet. It's a comprehensive thing you have to take a look at. And to say that this will solve all our problems probably won't.
Let's talk about the power. You guys are in public power, and there's the push by the state to be 100% renewable, and these dams get you 11% there for PUD 1, and how much is it? About the same for PUD 3 at least on the Snake River? 11% of that power.
I'll let Jack start with the issue, because we deal with the Initiative 937, the Renewable Energy Law. Yeah. PUD 1 does not because of its size, but the Clean Energy Bill, these guys will be included.
Yeah, so that's going to impact you if anything were to happen down the road.
Absolutely. So Mason 1, Mason 3 are full requirements of customer. We don't have like our own resources. Well, I think Mason 3 has a small generation unit out by the correction center, but I don't think it's used much. But so we're full requirements customers, and so all the costs that at cost electricity we get is from the Columbia River system. You take out the 4 Snake River dams, it's going to increase our costs. But it's not just about the cost. It's like I said, it's the bigger problem. You take out those dams, it's going to cost the taxpayers and the ratepayers about $1.7 billion. You're going to have to deal with the restoration of the system. You're going to have to deal with the impact of no navigation. Instead of transporting wheat and other products down through the system, you're going to be using trucks. You got a recreational issue with people that like to use those lakes, those reservoirs for recreation. Restoration of the waterway itself. It's just it's going to be a huge cost. So what really bothers me is it's really not going to contribute very much to producing more fish. Also, 96% of the fish passage of young fish go through those dams. It's already at 96%. So I just don't know, and there's constantly improving that as well. So I just have a real hard time with this.
Mm-hmm. Well, the clean energy issue, I think, is a really important one, Jeff, because the Pacific Northwest compared to the rest of the country, has incredibly clean resources. I want to say it's like 60% of our energy comes from hydropower. In the rest of the country, 60% comes from coal and natural gas.
Wow.
So we start out with an advantage right there. The second thing is that Mason PUD 1 and Mason PUD 3, all of our electricity is 90% carbon-free right now out of the box. And because we have to comply with Initiative 937 and spend a little extra money and efforts to get more renewables into our system that are required by the state, I think that pushes us to over 100% in purchases for clean energy. So both of us are almost right there on that 100% clean. You reduce the amount of energy that we get from hydro, the renewable clean source. As Jack said, that would be an increase in costs. Second thing is that the suggestion is that the replacement of power from the dams be wind and solar. The dams are the reason that wind and solar work well here in Washington State, because you can turn the dams on and off relatively quickly.
They're dispatchable.
As the wind goes up, wind goes down, sun comes up, sun goes down, to make sure that those resources can fit in. If you remove that ability to ramp things up, you have one solution, and that's build natural gas plants that are spinning all the time to do that. And so you're increasing your amount of renewables that are non-dispatchable. You can't depend on them to be there when you need to throw the switch, and replacing that backup, or the battery as we call it, which is hydropower, with a fossil fuel replacement, which is unfortunate, and it is more costly.
Sure.
I'm glad you pointed out the...
I want to add something too, if I may, is that if you take the Snake River dams out, it's loss of 3,000 megawatts, and then you take out the coal plants, and Seattle doesn't want get more gas plants. They don't want gas. What are you going to that's a lot of megawatts. So we're going to have brownouts in a big way. People just don't understand that. There's you have to. They're going to want electricity, and the only way to get it, if you take out the dams, is go back to gas or coal, even for that matter. So it's a dilemma for us.
Yeah, you actually read my mind. I was going to say that it's almost like just striking this balance where no one's satisfied no matter what. We have to have these alternate sources of energy and power. We have them, they're working, they're efficient, and yet people, it gets into this emotional argument whenever there's animals involved, especially, that somehow the plan's against nature, against animals, or stacking the deck against the fish and stuff. And it really, when you ask the people what the alternatives are, I don't even know what their arguments would be, because like you said, they don't want more coal plants, they don't want more gas, and it just seems like they keep kind of nitpicking at efficient means of power, and it's frustrating to see that. And I'm glad you're here explaining all this stuff, because I wonder how they answer that question. Like, what is their alternative? I mean, where do they want the power to come from?
And this should not be an us and them issue. This should not be environmentalists against so-called the bad utility people.
Sure.
That we're utility commissioners are elected. They're elected to be environmental stewards of everything we do.
Sure.
Water, power. So, we think we've been part of the solution, and I just don't think the public really knows that. We need to do a better job of getting out there and letting them know what we are doing.
Sure. One of the things on the other side of everything is we've seen some of the impressive returns as some of the dams have been breached around our areas, like the Elwha River Dam and things like that. Explain how, when folks see those types of restoration attempts, that may lead them down the path of assumption that the Snake River would do something similar to that for folks who have see those types of issues.
And for those particular situations, the removal of those dams was practical, because, for example, on Elwha, the dams that were there really weren't producing that much electricity. They were incredibly old. There were maintenance issues. There was siltation issues behind them. So initially they didn't produce much electricity. So them coming out was probably to their benefit. There have been fish returns. However, DNA tests have shown that Most of those fish are hatchery fish.
Okay.
Hopefully they will eventually become naturally spawning fish as time goes on, but right now it's almost all hatchery fish that are returning there. The Condit Dam that was removed along the Columbia River by Pacificor was another situation. Very little generation, and it was more cost-effective for Pacificor to remove that dam and go to other resources. The Snake River dams are a whole nother thing, because for several reasons. First of all, not only do they generate power for utilities, but the revenue from that power, 14 to 15% of it, goes into fish programs. That's a revenue source that would be gone if the dams are removed, number one. The second thing is their multiple use. We had kind of alluded to the fact that these dams have electricity generation, but they also provide irrigation for farmers along the river. They provide the water highway for nearly all the wheat that's shipped out of the Pacific Northwest. And a good example of the lack of having that is what's going on right now at the Bonneville Dam. They're doing some maintenance on the locks there, and because they're doing maintenance on the locks, no wheat is moving down to be shipped out to foreign markets. And so basically they're waiting for that to be fixed. Their option would be to get trucks and trains and things like that. The result is increased truck traffic, increased emissions from transportation, impacts on roadways, and things like that. So you've got that going on. You've got the recreation issue that are going on with the dams that are there.
Irrigation.
So basically, those have many more uses that are kind of intricately tied to the economy of Eastern Washington, and that are tied to the legacy of Eastern Washington. Basically, the farming areas in Eastern Washington are built on the fact that there's the Columbia River system that provides the transportation and the energy for them to be, and water, to be able to do that. A good example is Grand Coulee. Grand Coulee, when it was built, and still to this day, the primary function of that dam is, even though it's the biggest generator of electricity in the nation, the primary function of that dam is irrigation. Not generation of electricity.
You know, we could talk about this for the rest of the hour, but we got to push it on here.
Sure.
But would love to have you guys on and talk a little bit more about this, maybe in depth a little later down the road as things start to continue to shake out. Mason County 1 Commissioner Jack Janda, and from PUD 3 Joel Myer. Thanks for coming in, guys.
Thank you.
A very interesting topic for sure.